The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. Kia ora tātou, this is Toby Manhire with another episode of your friendly local politics podcast, Gone by Lunchtime. What you're about to hear is part of the Gone by Lunchtime Megapod, a 12-hour epic event recorded on September 20 at Spin-off HQ. Enjoy. Tēnā koutou katoa, I'm Toby Manhire. Good news for me and probably for you too. We're now past the halfway point of this ridiculous megapod. It's just past 3 o'clock on Wednesday the 20th of September. And yeah, we're into the back 6 hours, the back half. In the second half of this hour, we've got Ben Mackay calling in on matters Australian and Trans-Tasman. But right now in the studio, we've got Brooke van Velden. Kia ora, Brooke.
Hello, thanks for having me
Great
here.
to have you in. I see you've been incredibly disciplined about keeping the magenta wardrobe going across the course of the campaign. I don't think I've seen you not in magenta.
There have been a couple of days where even I've had a break from the magenta.
Right.
But the problem is, every time I've not worn magenta, people then have stopped me and asked, why aren't you wearing your magenta?
Well, that's a good question. I only mention that really, or part of the reason I mention that is that it is a great blessing not to have the Rodney Hyde yellow jacket. Do you remember that? Do you remember the Rodney Hyde yellow jacket? Which is, I mean, that's a good argument, if no other, to shift from the yellow to the magenta branding.
Oh, I certainly wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't a colour that I actually already liked.
Right. Okay. We've been asking everyone, Brooke, who comes on this podcast to answer just 3 questions as part of a wider scientific project. The first one is your opportunity to win a box of chocolate fish. Ooh. If you are the closest person to guess the turnout for up to 1 decimal point for the election 2023 on October 14. And just to remind you that it was 82.2 in 2023. 2011 was the lowest, maybe in all time in MP, certainly in recent times, on 74.2. So wow. What do you reckon?
I'm going to go with a solid 85.
85.
Yeah.
You think it's going to be higher?
Yeah.
You think that this is the ACT wave, the magenta wave?
100%.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm going to say that it's higher because I've never met so many people who are politically engaged than this year. Everyone is talking about politics everywhere I go. You know, you even cast your mind back to 2 elections ago. If you started talking about politics on the street or in a shop, you know, people would look at you a little bit sideways and say, oh no, we don't do that here. But everywhere I go, I hear from people that their friends are openly discussing politics. In
a constructive, positive way or in a we're angry way?
There is a lot of frustration, but a lot of people are searching for hope. And I think there's a big swing for a change of government. But I also think with COVID, people, you know, sat at home, were forced to sit at home and watch the 1 p.m. briefings and became far more politically attuned than we've ever seen in history.
Second question. A lot of politicians and media are sad junkies for political TV, like whether it's West Wing or Veep or whatever. Is there one of those that you have a particular penchant for? If you had to take one political TV show to a desert island, which one would you go for?
To be honest, when I get home from work, the last thing I feel like doing is watching another political drama.
That's good.
I feel like I get enough of that in my life.
That's good.
So I actually watch, I wouldn't call it reality TV, but I watch things like, is it real or is it fake? When they're cutting the cakes and making baking goods into live models.
Okay.
And then I watch all those tween dramas because you always know what the ending's going to be and you don't have to think too hard.
Right, okay. I'm trying to think of this, is it real or is it not? It's some metaphor for something, but I've failed miserably. I'll get something by the end. Last question, Mojo. Not the last question of the interview, the last question of these questions are asking about.
Yeah, thanks.
Mojo has been a big theme of the election. Christopher Luxon can't stop talking about Mojo. He's been looking for it everywhere, under the carpet, in the sea, in the cupboard.
Yeah.
He wants to bring it back.
50 of them in Wellington.
Yeah, that's right. That's good. But you personally, we're doing this. We're doing a survey. How is your own personal mojo at this moment? 0 being terrible, gone. There's none of it. 10 being absolutely brimming.
10.
10. All the politicians are saying 10.
No, I'm really enjoying this campaign. Yeah.
Okay.
Every day I get out there and I feel like I want to meet more people. And the vibe is so positive. I really do feel like there's going to be a change of government, but especially because I've been campaigning in Tāmaki. And the vibe in Tāmaki is for change as well. No matter where I go, I feel like people are really engaging with having choice in that electorate for the first time.
I invited Simon O'Connor to come and do a debate, and sadly he was busy all day, which, I'm sure he was. So I thought I might play Simon O'Connor for a bit, for just an hour or so. I don't know if Simon O'Connor sort of talks like this, I think. Is that sort of about right? Is that about right? Or should I...
Oh,
or do I need to move it? What's the nature of the debates you've been having, just so we can give people a flavour? When do things get interesting? Not necessarily antagonistic, but interesting. What are the points of difference?
Well, to be honest, we haven't actually had that many debates together.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of the residents' associations said, we don't want to be political this year, or for whatever reason. We reached out and said, let's do some panels, and they all said no. The Rotary clubs down there said no. So there's only really been...
Is that because they don't want to be seen to be doing a wedge campaign on the right? Is that what it is?
I'm not sure what it is, to be honest. But we were at Sacred Heart today, and there was a really good debate. But I think on the whole, everything's been pretty collegial.
Okay.
And certainly I'm not standing against him because, I'm doing it out of any personal thing for Simon.
Except it is kind of personal. I mean, I'm not saying it's ad hominem, but it is partly because his personal views stand in stark contrast to yours, right? That's
right. So I'm sure he is actually a nice person, but when it comes to our values, we are very different as people, and so that's why I'm standing against him.
And do you want to just sort of lay out what some of those are? I mean, they're on the right, including within the National Caucus, and I imagine to some extent within the ACT caucus, you have levels of liberalism and conservatism, and you can put them on whatever axis you want, but they broadly relate to social versus economic. And you, correct me if I'm wrong, socially liberal in a way that Simon O'Connor is very socially conservative. Is that the main difference?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say there's actually quite a few things that we do have in common. When it comes to freedom of speech or the economy, and actually thinking that we have a more productive economy where it's more about business rather than government involvement. But where we seriously differ are on individual choices. So for us, the first time I encountered Simon was when I was writing the end-of-life choice bill for David Seymour. That's something I was very proud to have had a part in, because I genuinely believe in choice and dignity and respect at all stages of someone's life, including in those last few days. He was very opposed to that and still is. When it comes to women's rights, it's a fundamental belief of mine that women should have the right to have an abortion if that's something they think is necessary for them. Whereas, his comments about Roe versus Wade was that, today was a good day, and I think that went down pretty poorly with the local constituency. And
with his own party and his own leader who instructed him to take it down.
That's right. And I've met quite a few women, even in the past few weeks, who've said, look, if I needed help in the local community, I don't feel like I would feel comfortable going to see him based on his personal values and views, whereas I do feel comfortable walking into your office. And so that's the difference between having a local MP who's accessible and willing to work hard for you, but also shares your values.
He's pretty hardworking, isn't he? He is a pretty hardworking local MP, don't you think?
Oh, there's varying accounts.
Okay.
But even when I've been out door knocking, I've been amazed at the number of people who've said, you're the first MP who's ever knocked on my door and listened. And that's what people are wanting.
I mean, one of the interesting things I think about New Zealand's relatively small House of Representatives compared to most comparable parliaments around the world is that we have, by the nature of the smallness and quite strong whipping, we don't really have within parties, within caucuses, that wider range of view. And I think one of the things that is good about a person like Simon O'Connor, whatever you think about his views on particular issues, is that he reminds me of what you get in the British Parliament, where you have all of these on the right, for example, 1912 committee members who are just they kind of spend as much time giving their own leader shit as they do the other side. And there's a healthiness about it. Sometimes it tips over. There's a healthiness about it. And this is a long-winded way to ask you how would you would feel if there was a member of the ACT caucus who had views that were anti-abortion.
Well, look, I think everybody is entitled to their views. I do. But I think where it differs is just on a level of respect for people, that you can acknowledge that there are a range of views and that everybody should feel respected in the community. And what I think I differ is that I believe that the government should allow for people to have choice, to have a fulfilling life. And that means that you should have a range of opportunities to have a certain faith or a religion, or you could be a certain gender or sexuality, or you could, decide to have an abortion if that's something that you think is really necessary for you, or if you're suffering from a terminal illness, be able to have choice at the end of your life. But where we are very different is, there are some people who just don't believe that those choices should exist, but then go a step further and make people feel uncomfortable.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirahama, the Kōpapa Korangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Tell me about your political journey. Were you a Green supporter or member back in the day? Have I got that right?
That's right. I was a Green Party supporter. I was never a member of the party.
It's not that unusual a trajectory, is it? There are others who, I think Jordan Williams likes to tell people that was his journey as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So tell me about that and what changed.
So for me, I've always been a social liberal, but I've always wanted to leave the world a better place in terms of the environment. So I've always been an environmentalist, and I still am. I think I am one of Parliament's only vegetarians, which is always a bit shocking to me as well. But I think the difference for me changed when I studied economics and international trade at university, and I started to understand that, it can be possible that you can care about the environment and you can care about the economy as well. And it doesn't have to be that banning and taxing and regulating your way out of a problem will actually be the solution. There are other ways of solving problems to do with climate change. And I'll give you a real recent example. And it was the offshore oil and gas exploration ban. Now, if you're someone who is an environmentalist and you want to leave the world a better place, that might actually sound quite good at face value because you don't like big emitters and polluters. But the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment came out and said, this is likely to increase global emissions. And that's because we still need methanol. And instead of having it produced in New Zealand, the effect of this could be that we just end up importing the same product from another country where they have coal to burn it,
I guess,
to create it, and you end up increasing global emissions.
And the sort of the ACT climate policy is about let's let the market do it. Let's set a price and let's or use the ETS rather to
use the emission trading scheme. And there's a really good difference between ACT and the Green Party here, which is always made me frustrated, but continues to make me frustrated, and that's we're opposed to scientific discovery and technology and innovation. I've been talking to people who have done angel investment into things called boluses. If a bolus is a new piece of scientific discovery where if you put it into a cow's stomach, it's like a little pill, it can reduce cow methane emissions by 90%.
But the Greens aren't opposed to technology
to
reduce methane emissions, are they?
Well,
James Shaw has sort of led a process that poured money into
genetic modification of organisms. So if you look at one of the universities in New Zealand started doing ryegrass production, they can't plant that in New Zealand soil, so they've taken it to the United States. But if you were able to plant ryegrass into New Zealand paddocks, you could reduce methane production by 30%. But the Green Party has always been opposed to genetic modification to help solve the climate change problem. And I don't think it's acceptable to actually have a climate change minister that, on one hand, wants to reduce agricultural emissions and thinks the best way to do that is to tell farmers how many cows they can own and that they need to cull their herd sizes, when you could help the economy and also reduce methane at the same time.
It's weird last Sunday, wasn't it, that ACT Party launch? You were there. I was there.
Yeah.
That was strange, wasn't it? I mean, I think most people could really do without other people attaching themselves to crowds if they can't find crowds of their own. But what about what happened afterwards in terms of some of the supporters who... I experienced a bit of it, not personally, but I saw a little bit of it. It was against the TV people, really. But there was the cameraman who got hit in the head by what it turns out is an elderly lady. But also, that wasn't all of it. There was quite a lot of hollering and quite antagonistic verbals that were dished out.
Right.
What do you make of that? I mean...
Well, look, the way I see it, because I was actually backstage, so...
Right.
I couldn't see anything.
Sure.
But what happened is, the media did suggest that there'd been, allegations of, this ACT supporter punching a newsreader, and turns out was a little elderly lady.
But then elderly ladies are ACT supporters too.
They made it out to be something much different than,
Oh, you think it was misrepresented?
I think it was misrepresented.
Oh.
But I also think, we were asked to do an inquiry on what actually occurred. And so the ACT Party has gone away and we've asked for witnesses who've provided statements about what actually happened from where they were. And we've actually gone to Newshub and we've written a letter. And so we do believe there was misrepresentation and we're waiting to hear back.
I overheard, I was standing there when David Seymour was having a conversation with the cameraman who characterised it as, he'd fallen in the seat and got pushed in the face. And he wasn't, that didn't seem like a histrionic account of something that had happened. I mean, let's not try and be jury on that
I'd
here.
I'd prefer not to, because there has been things on both sides, but we've done our inquiry and we've now written what we have discovered.
Sure. The thing that I guess I found discomforting was the next day there was an email that went out from David Seymour. He had said, I thought, spoke well at the stand-up afterwards about he goes up and down the country and says the media are doing their job. In that email, which was a shaking the tin, donate to us, he said the media are misrepresenting us. And do you think there is any risk that sort of rhetoric feeds into this bloody media stuff, which we don't want? That's an overseas thing. Obviously people are free to complain about the media. The media are absolutely not above criticism. But there is a danger, I think, from a political pulpit that could be encouraged. Do you think there's anything in that?
Look, I'm less concerned by that. I think there was actually misrepresentation, and that's why we've written our letter. And I don't want to get too much into the details of what we have discovered and what's actually in there. But I think it's really important that that both parties are respect each other. If media are allowed to access political party stand-ups and access political party campaign launches, there has to be respect on both sides. What I think was missing there was a little bit of that respect on both sides. And I think in some ways people do feel a little frustrated. You think the media were
insufficiently respectful of?
Yeah, I'm not going to go into those specific details because that could potentially be for a later date.
Okay.
But what I think is really important is, I was talking to people in the public the next day and having heard the news, had conjured up an image of some, 6-foot massive guy who's an ACT supporter, like really whacking someone, when in fact it was an elderly lady sitting in a seat and had a cameraman fall on top of them, and she decided to, use whatever energy that she had to try and swat him away.
I mean, I also saw a man on the aisle absolutely giving a gobful to Jenna Lynch. Spoken, not anything physical, to be clear. But it was pretty unpleasant. I mean, it's not. Well, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it's necessarily an isolated incident, and I wonder whether there's any reflection on that at all.
Well, look, as I say, I was actually backstage, so I didn't have any ability to see or hear anything. But, I think it would have been really good if people had actually talked about what we'd wanted to discuss on that day, which is that ACT actually has a vision for the election. Unfortunately, a protester became the main part of the story. But we actually do want to see a change of government. Mm-hmm. And that means we don't just want to see the red Chris become the blue Chris and then nothing actually change with policy. We actually want to make New Zealand an aspirational, hopeful country with a thriving economy where it doesn't matter if you were here for 15 generations or one. Everybody feels welcome and equal and accepted. And I think that's really important. That's a message that a lot of young people are hoping to hear, that there is actually an aspirational future for them in this country. And unfortunately, all of that got missed in the media reporting.
On policy, what is it that gets a fire burning in your belly from a policy standpoint in terms of the stuff that you want to change, that you want to be in government, Brooke van Velden, to change?
Well, there's a few things that I would really like to change. The first is our infrastructure investment. I've got a members' bill that I put through Parliament this year. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it was unsuccessful, but we could bring it back. And it says every time a new home goes into a local area, half of the GST cost on construction goes back to the local council that issued the consent, so that when more homes go in, we're actually upgrading all the infrastructure networks with it. Because I think if you looked at what the effect of the floods earlier this year was, we've had a lot of intensification, but it hasn't actually kept up with infrastructure investment. And so even when you've got your plans for building sites, and there's certain square meterage for having lawns, when people buy the homes, quite often they just pave them over. So we've actually got less permeable surface in our cities than even the plans for the city look like. And that means that we've got to have a lot more investment into the pipe networks under the ground. So what I'm hoping is that, ACT and National manage to get together and support my members' bill, and that we can actually keep that going. Because I think councils in some ways make it really hard to build because they're afraid of the costs of putting more homes in the community. And that makes it more unaffordable for someone who's younger and wanting to actually stay in our beautiful cities. That's why so many young Kiwis are going to Australia, because they say, I'm just not sure if I'll ever have a future here. And if we can start with some really basics of driving down housing unaffordability by even looking at the networks under the ground, then I think that's a really good place to start.
And is that something that you've is there a ministerial warrant that you see attached to something like that?
I see where you're going.
Well, Erica Staff was in here before, and she's like, yeah, I want education, yeah, I want immigration. I mean, I think I guess it's probably quite nice for those to be real and live questions at the moment, isn't it? Given the way that the polls are pointing. Is there something you've got your eye on?
All of the portfolios are up for negotiation. All of them. And that's essentially what people are voting for. They're voting for different political parties to join together in a coalition and work tightly together. And so it's not for people before the election to actually say, I'm going to be the minister of XYZ, because that may not actually be how the chips fall on the night.
Totally. But you can still say, quite fancy there, quite fancy a little bit of minister of local government. That's the really sexy one, minister of local government that you're after.
But no. The thing that I've signed up for in ACT, and which all of my colleagues did, is putting the community and people of New Zealand before ourselves. And it's essentially what David did when he did end-of-life choice, is he turned down being a minister so that he could pass end-of-life choice, because he couldn't do both at the same time. And that's the same sort of culture that we've instilled in ACT with us 10 MPs, is that we get up every day thinking, how do we pass policy that will actually make people's lives better? Not to have a great title, because having a title doesn't actually do anything. And having a $100,000 pay rise doesn't necessarily give you an output. It's actually getting the policies across the line. So if we can get the policies across the line, I'd be happy for any of my parliamentary colleagues to be the minister of that. Because we didn't join ACT to be Prime Minister or to be a particular minister.
Are you going to win, Tāmaki?
I'm certainly going to give it my best shot. I'm not going to take anything for granted, but it does really feel like the mood on the ground is for change.
Okay. Good luck out there. Thank you for coming in. Good luck on October 14. We'll talk again soon. Kia ora. This is the spin-off election Megapod. When we return, we'll have on the line Ben Mackay. Not from Australia, but from Wellington. Talk soon. Thanks for listening. There's plenty more where this came from on your Gone By Lunchtime feed. Thanks to Jane, Te Aihea and Samuel and the rest of the team at the Spin-Off for making the Megapod happen.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihea Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.